Okay guys, hola, ¿cómo estás? Today we are going to talk about reflexive verbs. Now, reflexive verbs are basically just regular verbs that have a different pronoun in the front to make it so that you are actually doing the verb back onto yourself, or whoever the subject is actually doing this verb back onto yourself. Now in English, we usually indicate this with a reflexive pronoun like myself, yourself, etc. However, in Spanish, that back onto myself isn't always as clear. So these verbs should be learned as a whole, and we should understand them and their meaning as a whole. Because if you separate it and you remove the reflexive pronoun and we don't keep it as a two-part verb, you will see that it actually has a slightly different meaning. So let's go ahead and dive in and get started. Before we even go into our reflexive pronouns and our reflexive verbs, we need to review our regular subject pronouns, because if we can recognize which person we're talking about, it will make conjugating reflexive pronouns that much easier. So, I know sometimes the terminology gets a little exhausting, but bear with me because it's always good to know the terminology so that we can refer to it and understand it with ease. Okay, so what's the first person subject pronoun? Yo. Okay, so now we know that subject pronoun, yo, meaning I. The rest of them should follow pretty easily. So, tú, él, ella, usted, nosotros, vosotros, ellos, ellas, or ustedes, okay? Remember that él and ella is he or she. Ellos and ellas are they for masculine or they for feminine, or also ellos can be they for masculine and feminine combined. But usted and ustedes is the formal form of you. So be careful with those, don't confuse them. Okay? Now, let's continue. Let's conjugate a regular verb before we go conjugating a reflexive verb. So, levantar is a verb that can be either a reflexive verb or it can be just a regular conjugated AR verb, okay? And it means to raise. So, first, let's get the stem or the root. Okay, we remove the ending and we get the root. Now, we conjugate. The yo form is levanto. The tú form is levantas. El, ella, usted, levanta. Okay, because this is a review, we're not going to look at the rest of the forms, just this to get warmed up. Okay, now you guys know that if you want, you can include the pronoun in front, like yo levanto, or if you want to make it negative, you can say yo no levanto. Okay, so don't forget that if you guys want, you can include that in the front here. Okay, same thing here. You can say tú levantas or tú no levantas, etc., etc. Okay, now the most common phrase that you'll hear in class is levanta la mano, okay? Levanta la mano, meaning a command. Raise your hand, or yo levanto la mano, etc., etc., okay? Now, you'll notice here that we don't say levanto mi mano. We don't say I raise my hand. In Spanish, we actually say I raise the hand. Because of the way the verb is conjugated, we know who's speaking, okay? So generally speaking, you raise your own hand, right? It's a little bit more clear when we work with reflexive verbs, but here, generally speaking, when we refer to our own body parts, we don't actually have to indicate that it's mine because it's already built into the verb, okay? So, let's continue with our reflexive pronouns. Now, we have seen pronouns before, but reflexive pronouns we've actually seen when we talk about our name. So, think about how do you say my name is, okay? Whenever we call ourselves by our names, we say me llamo Señora Saracen, right? So me llamo. What do you think the reflexive pronoun for the first person is? It's not yo, it's actually me. So when you say me llamo, you're saying I call myself. That is actually a reflexive onto the subject for the first person. So me llamo. You can't say me llamas. You're not saying you call me in this sense. You're saying I call myself. Okay? It's not to say that you can't say you call me. That is definitely a possibility, but then it's not a reflexive verb. It's just a regular verb. We are only looking at reflexive verbs right now, things that are done unto the subject. Okay? So, me llamo, and then what about for the tú form? Te llamas. If you look at your worksheet that you're following along with the video, you'll see that there is a spot for you guys to write down these reflexive pronouns to refer back to. So go ahead, as we go through this, write these down on your worksheet. So, me llamo, te llamas, and se llama. Excellent. Pretty basic, pretty easy, right? What about for the nosotros form? Nos. Now, be careful. Don't confuse nosotros with nos. Nos is the shortened form, yeah? It looks like a shortened form, but it's actually a different word altogether, and it has a different meaning and a different concept. So, be careful that you're not shortening the nosotros into nos, because they will not be the same thing. Okay. Continuing on, os, and again with se. Now, we do have the same reflexive pronoun for the singular and the plural form of the third person. It's usually pretty clear because the verb will be conjugated differently into a singular or plural, so it will be clear who is speaking. If it's not, you can always include the subject pronoun along with the reflexive pronoun to be a little bit more clear. Okay, so let's conjugate a complete verb. And once again, please follow along. If you need to pause the video to do this on the worksheet, go ahead and do that, okay? So, when we're conjugating reflexive verbs, we just conjugate the regular verb as we would and just add the pronoun to the front, and that makes it reflexive, okay? As we saw, the verb levantar, you just conjugate it as a regular AR verb. Now, the infinitive for a reflexive verb keeps the se at the end. You keep it attached, and you always keep it in the third person as the infinitive. But when you conjugate it, you have to put the reflexive pronoun in the front as you would with the verb llamar. So, me llamo, right? But the infinitive form of me llamo would be llamarse, okay? So here we're going to work with levantarse, which means to get up. It's similar in the idea that levantar means to raise, but here get up because you're doing it to yourself. Okay? So let's go ahead and conjugate. We know levanto, so what do? We just add me. Okay? If you need to pause the video to take a second to write, go ahead and do so for your worksheet. Just keep along and follow along so that we can practice together. Okay? So, me levanto. And then for tú, you just add te. So te levantas. You can say yo me levanto, tú te levantas, but it's really redundant, okay? Because our verb is conjugated and we have the reflexive pronoun, so it's not really necessary to use that subject pronoun anyway, okay? Now, levanta, se. If we want to make a complete sentence, we can say, for example, me levanto a las 6. I get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. Me levanto a las 6 de la mañana. Te levantas a las 6 de la mañana. O se levanta a las 6 de la mañana. Okay? For example, Juliana se levanta a las 6. Juliana being my subject. Okay? I can add the name of the person to the front as well. Now, if I want to make any of these negative, where do we put the word no? We will actually move the word no to the front here, okay? Just like we would a regular verb. We consider this as two-part verb, okay? So because it's two parts together, we don't want to separate them, so we'll just put the no in the front. No se levanta a las 6. Se levanta a las 6:30, okay? Or Juliana no se levanta a las 6. Juliana se levanta a las 6:30. Okay, so if you have a subject, the name of somebody or something, that will come first, and the no comes before the verb. Okay, the verb meaning the two parts together. Yeah, so let's continue. Now we have levantamos, nos levantamos, os levantáis, and se levantan. Okay, pretty straightforward. You just conjugate the verb and you add the pronoun to the front, and it becomes reflexive. And remember that if you don't add that pronoun, it's a different word with a different meaning. So, nos levantamos a las 7. That would be very nice, right? Os levantáis, se levantan a las 7. Okay? So we get up at 7 o'clock. Okay, now let's get a little bit more complicated. The verb despertarse, I believe we have seen before. The SC once again means stem changing. So how do we know which letter is the stem changing? Because we have des and per. We have 2 letter E's. How do we know which one? Well, what we would do is we have to remove the ending arse, right? We remove this arse to get the stem. Once we have the stem, we just go to the first letter, right, from the end. And this is the one that will change. So, despertarse, the E will become an IE, yeah? And we have to conjugate the stem changing as well as include the pronoun. It's actually not too bad. So, despertarse is slightly different. It means to wake up, which is a little different than get up. Because sometimes we wake up and then we get up 20 minutes later, right? We hit snooze. So, despertarse. Let's conjugate. Despierto, okay? So we see our stem changing and our yo form conjugation. So we just add the me, okay? So you can see that the me despierto, but be careful with the stem changing. So what do you think about for the tu form? Te despiertas and se despierta a las 8:30. On the weekend maybe, right? So me despierto a las 8:30 o me despierto temprano. Me despierto muy temprano. See? So be careful when we have stem changing verbs because the conjugating part is more complicated than making it reflexive. Okay? Same thing. Nos despertamos. Now, if you guys remember stem changing, they don't stem change in the nosotros or the vosotros form, but they would, okay, for the third person. So, don't forget about that, yeah? Nos despertamos a las 8:30. Os despertáis a las 6, no? Okay, so make sure that you have filled out your worksheet. Take a second, go through everything, make sure it's all written down properly. If you have any questions, you can write them down and ask them later. So, let's do a little practice. Practiquemos. Escribe el pronombre correcto. So, you'll see the verb. You'll have to recognize which person the verb is and then add the appropriate pronoun. Now, you will get the answer, so if it's wrong, you can correct it, but this is a way for you to test yourself to see how well you can recognize the conjugations and how well you know your pronouns already. So let's get started. Okay, cepillen los dientes. Now, I'm not going to tell you what the verb means because you have to look it up and figure it out, okay? But los dientes means teeth, okay? So what do you do to your teeth every morning? Okay. Now, it's a reflexive, so if it's the en for the verb cepillar, oh, I believe this is incorrect. It should actually be cepillan. I'm sorry about that. Let's change it really quickly, okay? Be careful, I apologize. So, cepillan los dientes, okay? So, what would the pronoun be? Se cepillan los dientes, okay? Because the verb is cepillarse. Now, like la mano, levantar la mano, here again we use the article instead of the possessive adjective. So we don't say my teeth, we say the teeth. And really with the reflexive verbs, it's even more included because here you have who is doing what to themselves, which is why you don't actually have to say my teeth, it's just the teeth. Se cepillan los dientes. Vale, seguimos. Okay, lavo la cara. Now, which person is this right here? What is lavo? Me lavo la cara. Perfect. Again with la. Okay. Duchamos a las 6. The amos form, which one would that be? Nos duchamos a las 6. Pretty easy, right? So let's go through the rest kind of quickly. Bañas a las 9. Okay. Laváis el pelo. So again, before it was la cara, which is the face. El pelo is hair. So, vos. And then pone el uniforme. Se. Now, please look up all of these words and look them up as reflexives and see the difference. We have learned the verb poner, I believe, right? We have learned the verb poner as put, yes? So if this means put, what do you think ponerse means? It is actually very similar and very connected. So take a look because we need to know the difference between poner and ponerse, okay? Excellent. So let's continue. A couple more. Quito el abrigo. So this is the O ending, which means it is me quito. Now, quitarse is the opposite of ponerse. So if you've already looked at ponerse, then you should be able to figure out quitarse now. Okay? Sentamos, a very common word that we will hear in class. Nos sentamos en las sillas. And the one that we should know, se llama Juan. Okay? Excellent. Pretty basic, pretty easy. Now, if you look, we have finished with the video portion. Now, there is one extra word. I just want to see if everybody went all the way through the video. So if you went through the video and your neighbor didn't, don't tell your neighbor. This is for me to check to see if you listened and watched the whole video. Okay? So, there is an asterisk. Write down the word peinarse on the asterisk. Don't share this information. It's just to see if you watched and did all the exercises properly. Okay? So now there are some questions. Responde a las preguntas. Respond to the questions on the paper. Okay? Please try to write complete sentences. Please try to conjugate the verbs. Read the questions and answer the questions accordingly. Be careful with the conjugations. It's not always going to be first person. Please work by yourself. I want to see how you do without any help, okay? And then at the end of class, after you finish, when you hear the bell, just run and drop this paper on my table so I can look over them when you guys are done, okay? Good luck. I hope you guys learned a lot. And if you have any questions, just feel free to ask them tomorrow in class. Ciao!